Welcome back, people. Episode number 27. Today, what we are dealing with is disruption. We keep hearing about different technologies getting it done, different things, 3D printing, prefabrication, kit of parts, but which one is real? Have a seat, sit down, listen to one of the number one innovators in the space speak, and learn a thing or two about a thing or two. Welcome back to Real Tech Talk, baby. That's why we're here, bro. This is Real Tech Talk. Boom shakalaka. So who the hell are you, bro? You know? What are you into? What do you do? Yo, you can keep it real here. Tell me about these real estate players.
Eric Brody is the managing principal of CEM VC LLC. All opinions expressed by Eric and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of CEM VC LLC. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. Clients of CEM VC LLC may maintain positions in the securities discussed in this podcast.
Welcome back, people. Real Tech Talk, episode number 27, Deuce 7. Stop playing with me. Every time we tell you, we are going to bring technologists that are absolutely changing the game. So let me set the stage for you. Today, we got Cuby Technologies. We'll go into the background, but I want him to drive right into what he's changing. You keep hearing about it. 3D printing. You keep hearing about modular construction, kit of parts, prefabrication. But what is the one that is changing the game? My man today, Alex, thank you for coming through on the podcast. I appreciate you having you here. Now, historically, I say, what's your background? Where are you coming from? Please do tell. But then I want to dive right into what you're doing because I only have a half an hour. And honestly, it's so fascinating and I love talking to you about it. So give us a little bit about how you got into technology, why you're here, and then what we're doing.
Yeah, well, first off, thanks for having me. Sure. I'm a recent listener, but you and I have known each other for a little bit now. You've got.
I can't believe you just recently, bro. Like and follow. Stop.
And then we changed that. Don't worry. Now we have to. We're obligated. But thanks for having me.
Of course.
My background, I think, similar to yours. I come from a real estate family. I've touched buildings my whole life. Looked at buildings my whole life. I've studied engineering in school, and I always joke because I could never decide between technology and real estate. Luckily, you're an investor in PropTech. That's a word now. Those two worlds have fused.
Where'd you go to school, by the way?
I got a full ride to go to Drexel to study both business and engineering.
Which is Philly.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Grew up in Philly, originally from Russia.
Mother Russia.
Yeah, controversial now.
Controversial topic.
Yeah, but my mom and I moved to Philly, so I naturally went to school there.
Yeah, because your mom wouldn't let you go very far from her.
No, I think like being first generation, you kind of, you don't have many options. Like,
it's
in the backyard. You kind of just, it was one of those things. I mean, in retrospect, I would have chose something maybe more namey, if you will.
Sure.
But no, I don't regret it. It was a lot of fun. They had this like work program the whole time. Mm-hmm. So you got to work full time. I got a lot of exposure. It was great. I think.
But it was real estate. All real estate.
Mostly, yeah. So private equity, banking, real estate kind of floated in that area, but mostly real estate, institutionally, development, private equity have touched probably every asset class under the sun.
And you were in a relatively tech-forward private equity real estate space, right? Weren't you at WeWork for a hot minute?
Yeah. So post my institutional days, I got recruited to WeWork and fairly early. I mean, this was like maybe 500th employee, something super early. And I left, there was 13,000 people. Everyone loves to shit on WeWork now. But the truth is, it was a lot of fun. It's a lot of exposure. And at the time, WeWork was not a PropTech company. That word didn't exist.
Right.
That was at the time when the fifth walls of the world were just emerging. And everyone.
Which, for my audience, Fifth Wall is the largest venture capitalist in the space.
Yeah, exactly. So anyone that basically builds an operating company and is backed by venture that sits on top of real estate, that's PropTech. Mm-hmm. And now there's construction tech, which is a spinoff, et cetera. So, at WeWork, I was working on special projects within real estate, everything from launching WeLive to trying to pivot to asset management and property management agreements, all the way to some aspects of the fund that WeWork launched. Lots of fun, lots of exposure. Again, met everyone, like literally every founder, every VC focused in this space, met through WeWork. That's why I give WeWork a lot of credit to now being that person that is super eloquent at both understanding how to build a building, how to invest in a building, but also how to build an operating company that sits on top of real estate. After that, I went to Lifehouse, which was another venture-backed company that's doing extremely well.
But that's a tech company, Lifehouse?
Yeah.
So why did you pivot? You were in real estate. You were doing your thing. You went to school for that. You had your engineering background. You go to WeWork, which was fronting like they were tech.
Yeah.
Then why the actual jump?
Actually, funny enough, Lifehouse was started by a former TPG, Starwood, Sidell Group investor. So it was actually even more real estate than tech, but it was a tech company through and through. The reason being, I love the idea of building technology into real estate. Just one of those things where same reason why investors get excited about it. Just this massive industry, very little change. How do you implement change by the way that technology companies grow and become more productive? So I was just very interested in that. And Lifehouse was kind of a good spin-off from WeWork, and it was complete opposite in the sense that WeWork was definitely the wrong cost of capital. It grew in the wrong way, raising venture effectively to...
So let's just talk about that for a second. You're saying that WeWork's problem was the type of money they used was like nitrous, like it just burns fast and it's got to make a lot of return, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you know your right cost of capital when you buy a building, right? It's debt, it's equity, but...
meaning the interest charged on anything.
The risk-reward necessary to meet that type of growth can't happen through real estate or anything that looks close to real estate.
Right. It must needs to be much faster, right? Like this, this
exactly.
2% growth, 3% growth, that does not work when your money needs a massive return.
Yeah, I will say though, there's a lot of people that obviously, and maybe I'm contrarian for this, that say that WeWork was not a technology company. However, there were aspects of WeWork that were technology businesses in the sense that find me any developer today that can build out 60,000 square foot spaces 15 times in a month. Right. That takes certain coordination, and that's why you see so many entrepreneurs spin off from WeWork because there was pieces within WeWork that are now standalone businesses or are tangential to the businesses those founders started that come from WeWork.
Or the total disruption of office as a result of WeWork, right? I mean, they did it. Like the idea was there.
For sure. Just maybe the wrong execution, wrong cost of capital.
So then why, so you went to this real estate
Lifehouse is the complete opposite. Lifehouse said, hey, we'll be asset light the whole time. And Rami, the founder, he built a business effectively for managing mom and pop boutique hotels, which historically are super unprofitable. So he built a tech stack to manage those hotels better in an asset light way. So they were just a brand and asset manager of a ton of technology.
And did it create a brand as a result of it?
For sure. But the faster way to grow, which now, they're backed by Booking.com and effectively Kayak, which is owned by Booking, and big VCs like Tiger and whatnot. But the way they grow now is they white label their technology stack and effectively, they spread through hotel owners and operate their hotels in a white label capacity.
Amazing. So now you were getting that taste of tech.
Yeah.
It was hitting your wheelhouse of loving real estate and technology, but then why the plunge?
Yeah, no, I mean, after that, I went back to traditional real estate. I started and helped build a business with the former chief development officer from WeWork, who's one of the most talented developers, I think, in the country today. He had a big GC that effectively rolled into WeWork, and he was the one responsible for building out those 15 locations a month. So that takes a special type of, you can attest to this, that's 100%. A special type of developer. And he, after WeWork, essentially took his family business and turned that into a asset management / investment management firm called Spaxel. And while I was there, we built out a pretty big team and bought probably one of the biggest portfolios during COVID of small cap multi, about 2,500 units in New Jersey. And then
which was a good moment because that was a good plan.
Yeah, for sure. Now, this is a whole topic in its own right of the next SFR being small cap multi.
Single family residence. Let me just tell my acronyms here.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, I sometimes will.
No, it's all good.
In the jargon. And he's building, several thousand units in the Bronx of affordable, and he was always very tech forward. And in that process, I saw kind of his approach into building, and he was always trying to find shortcuts, which I think effectively is what a developer is. A good developer, one that comes from GC land, not many developers.
But they're looking at millimeters and milliseconds of advantage, right?
Exactly. And I started myself looking into different construction solutions. So
and you saw how fucked up construction was, right? You realized it was just a mess.
I was never the guy that went to construction sites. This is even something I'm learning now, ironically. Because, from an institutional perspective, you kind of are the check and you do all this behind the desk work. You're never actually showing up that often. But in that process, I started interviewing all of the existing solutions in the construction tech space, which is Contact now kind of the pivot of what we're talking about now and what I do. I started interviewing everyone, like you said, from 3D printing to prefab to modular. None of it made sense.
Just to research, just because you're like, I want to do something on my own.
I wanted to be a customer. Maybe on my own, maybe implement in this development organization that we were running.
Right, because you had the capital background, understanding what money needs, and you're like, fine. So maybe I want to be a consumer of some of these technologies. Totally. What is it to affect some business plan?
I always was at the forefront of saying, hey, if I'm going to be in traditional real estate, we got to use all the tools I learned, all the stuff that's out there, all the founders that I'm super close with that are building something, all the venture groups I'm close
Which is
with.
quite unique, right? Because everyone's a laggard, and you wanted to be an adopter.
I was the person that was not only the adopter, but understood both the worlds. I can call bluff, but I can also know how to implement. So I still, I think to this date, am one of the few people that understands super well both of those sides, tech and the real estate side, just traditional real estate. Those two worlds, as you know, do not speak.
No.
Speak, hence the podcast. You're trying
Agreed.
to bridge those
100%.
So I was looking for construction technology solutions. The existing things out there that were backed by tons of venture didn't make much sense to me. Weren't practical to implement. It wasn't cheaper. Why would I take the risk in using it?
Give the example, because I love the way you explain it. When we were on the phone and we were chit-chatting about your company, which is called Cuby Technologies, by the way, you brought up, I was like, what are the technologies changing the game? And you laid it out.
Let's dive into it. So let's start with the problem. So I think I like to zoom out when I do this. When we think about the fact that there's 8 billion people in the world, you got to, constantly think about the fact that they need,
shelter.
Yeah, they need everything from the places they live, work, and play. Hospitals, schools, buildings, housing, it doesn't matter. We need more of it. The biggest problem is, can I
ask you a quick question, just tangentially? How do we know that's a problem? Because you're into the data. How do you know?
I mean, it's very simple. There's 1% vacancy in the residential market in New York City, for example, right? And for that reason, rents are super high. And then, it doesn't take a genius. Every headline every other day is there's a housing crisis, right? You go and try to find the home to buy. It's unaffordable. And also, you're overpaying and have no due diligence to close on the home. That's kind of an obvious. But
agreed. By the way, if you look, New York is you got to make a $50 million move in 24 hours with no diligence. And that's just on the development aspect. Imagine on a condo we're trying to make an acquisition.
Someone could argue that's a unique outlier, right? In New York City, it's dense, et cetera. But it's really everywhere around the country. I mean, that's a much deeper conversation. It's affordability and all that stuff.
So I agree with you. Yeah. There's a shortage. There's a crisis.
8 billion people. There's not enough people to build. That's the biggest issue. If you really break down why construction, in quotes, is broken and why people say that all the time, there's just not enough people able to build on that demand. The reason being is 1 in 4 construction workers today are 45 and older. That's a stat check, but that should be right. I'm just kidding. It's definitely right. I know this for a fact. All right, good. All right, we got that fact.
I don't know if we got it. I don't know if they actually checked that, boys. I don't know. We're going to have to check them.
But all right, let's assume much, much older. And
fine.
Everyone knows
older, not enough. We hear it all the time.
You've seen the stat, right? It's 500,000 workers needed today, and that's even with slowdown in demand over the next couple of years. And that's in the U.S. alone. That number is going to grow into the millions. And it's kind of obvious. I mean, I love to do this thing. Your guys are young. Do you guys have any friends that are construction workers?
No.
All right.
I do have one.
You do? How close? Close or super?
Close friend?
Yeah, a close friend?
I mean, we're not that close.
All right, all right. Well, in most cases.
But agreed.
Yeah, most
100%.
cases, 9 out of 10 times you go anywhere, no one even has a third cousin that's a construction worker.
Right.
It's a dying industry, unfortunately. And it's funny.
With massive demand.
Massive. I always say that if I had a kid today and they were, they're 18 years old, don't go to college. Go build a, plumbing business.
Dude, I say that shit all the time. I'm you got to be a plumber, an electrician. You have a brain, get on it.
Yeah, you get 30 employees under, you have $1 million business. Yeah. You didn't go to college.
That's right.
That's the demand. It's actually pretty straightforward. I'm sure soon we'll see a roll-up of these kind of archaic businesses and someone will do a PE play of some sort of sophistication. I'm sure of it.
I'm looking at one now. Hopefully they'll be on the pod and I'll invest in them. But yes, I agree. It's there. It's right in the background of us.
So going back to...
you identified the problem, but we agree. It's all fucked up. We need more supply.
That's one problem. There's not enough people to deliver on the demand. That's one problem. The second problem is construction hasn't really changed in 200 years. There's always a running joke. It's I hear it all the time. It's if Jesus were to come back to Earth, the only thing he'd recognize is construction. Mm-hmm. I've heard that one a couple times.
I like that one.
But it's true. If you look at fundamentally how products have evolved, and if you just take every other industry over the last, say, 100 years, 7 to 8x productivity gain, something like that.
Yeah, we're minus.
Construction is a 1% productivity gain. So nothing has fundamentally changed. But think about all the technology that's been implemented across everywhere else. So there's things that need to change. But the truth is, this isn't obvious. There's so much money going into folks trying to industrialize construction. And by industrialize, I think for folks on your podcast, it's imagine the way Toyota builds a car, right? There's a conveyor belt, there's an assembly line and a system. The current solutions today, first let's go back 50 years. We used to be able to buy homes in Sears catalogs. Right. If you remember that or...
I don't remember, but I hear it.
I'm not aging. I'm saying if you remember the concept of it.
No, I know you weren't aging me, by the way. I did take offense. Yeah, good. People talk about it. Yeah.
So it used to be able to buy...
I look good for 70.
Well, that's funny.
But okay, but so I agree, right? So they could purchase a home.
Back then, yeah. And Russia actually was a funny one. They were the first to implement really prefab. They used to have these concrete slabs that basically would stack on top of each other. I used to live in one of those. But since then, we've gotten away from that because people wanted customization. Like everyone wanted a one-off house. There was no like cookie cutter.
And it's very hard to standardize. And even from a tech space, it's all different technologies.
That's another one. Policy and code got more complicated. So
because the fire code, right? We didn't want everyone dying and burning down, right?
That's pretty good, I think. Yeah. But the solutions that today exist over, let's say, the last 10, 20 years is I break it up into three like major categories.
Right, which is what I wanted just to back up. The industry itself has point solutions, and then you see some of these massive solutions. You guys went after a to Z solution, of which there are three categories today you explained. Name the three categories.
So first, in terms of like, you say it well, it's like I call it Band-Aid and not Band-Aid. Software right now and what everyone loves to back, that's a Band-Aid for the industry. It's like a temporary solve, but unfortunately, like you live in sticks and bricks and physical things, so that ultimately makes it hardware. So it kind of has to be a end-to-end solution. In terms of end-to-end and full vertical integration, there's different business models of it, which we'll dive as a subset. I break it up into three categories. There's modular, there's prefab, and there's 3D printing. I think...
And we saw, so let's start with 3D printing and tell them why it's interesting, but why you think that's not the solution.
Look, all for venture betting on really, really exciting, interesting things. That's what venture is. Like you take the riskiest thing that has a binary outcome. In most cases, hardware and what people call deep tech, frontier tech, there's different words for it, but it's ultimately hardware, usually are binary solutions. Either it becomes really, really massive and, true moats because there's real IP, or it doesn't. 3D printing is one of those things where... Does your audience understand like conceptually what a 3D printing ability?
I mean, to break it down, just quickly. So no matter what, we need a foundation. Unfortunately, there's no way of printing a foundation. So we're excavating and we're pouring a foundation. The way I understood,
you can do screw pile foundations, which you don't need to pour for. But
okay, fine. So when the superstructure is so light that you don't need to really bear or get below the frost line, fine. But you need a trade to go in to provide something that's going to transfer the load above grade into the ground.
Yep.
3D printing is then what I thought what you had explained to me is it's now like a coordinated superstructure, right? So
it's framing. You're effectively solving the framing piece.
Okay.
You being in the construction world, you'll be the first to validate that framing is not necessarily the most labor/skilled intensive piece, and it doesn't take the longest.
No, and it's balloon framing. When you get used to wood, it moves relatively well.
So if you want to solve the industry well, just backing into what we talked about earlier, what really everyone should be solving for is the end-to-end skilled labor requirement. So like if you were to measure I like to talk about houses because it's very easy to understand for any audience. So just a single family house, how do you build that from scratch, end to end with the least amount of skilled labor hours? I think when you break down the equation of what everyone needs to solve for, it's really that. To me, 3D printing...
No, I agree. And it's also productivity.
But that backs in the hours, the measurement of productivity.
Right, exactly. And then I would say mitigation of cognitive labor, right? You can print it. You don't need to tell people as much or teach them as much, right? Less supervision.
Which theoretically is the pitch for 3D printing. But the problem is it's just generally the shell of a home. So
correct. So our audience may understand is you've gotten rid of one trade.
Yeah.
You still need the roof. They're not printing a roof. You're not printing a plumber, an electrician, mechanical, finishes, right? It's the door install. It's basically took out one subcontractor.
Yeah, which now you're seeing other 3D printing companies kind of like Diamond Age, which I'm sure you've seen. They're trying to push further into, for example, their 3D printing tool will have like a painting module, right? So they're trying to move into other skilled labor.
But what do you think its limitation is and why you don't think that's the future?
Simple, right? Like your building can't be bigger than the 3D printer.
Agreed. So that means no urban, there's like you were telling me that. You're like, what are you going to see? A 50-story 3D printer? Like what? How is that going to help anybody?
So we don't, and 3D printing is still really far away from a cost perspective, right? Like,
it still is more expensive?
Yeah,
okay.
It's far away. So
it's like a novelty for you. Okay, let's go to the other one, the Kateras of the world. Why did that die?
So let's start with modular. So that one's easier, which Katera is not. So modular, for your audience, the easiest way to understand it is imagine you have this room and you literally made this room start to finish somewhere in a giga facility offsite thousands of miles away.
Also called prefab, right? or
prefab
no?
different.
Okay.
Prefab is if you
So
were to
modularity is
The room, it's a
the
box.
hotel where
Yes.
they came with boxes and
think a box goes on an oversized truck, needs
Yeah.
police to escort it effectively,
Right.
and shows up to the site, and you stack them.
which
on
was
top.
the future 6 years ago, 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Everyone said that's the solution.
Yeah, it's growing, but the penetration has been very lackluster.
Why?
A couple of reasons. So first, let's start with the gigafactory. Usually there's some gigafactory, costs a lot of money, let's say $25 to $125 million.
So huge capital cost to
Very.
prove that this thesis may be correct.
Could
Huge
take
risk.
years to launch these factories, okay? When you step foot in these factories, have you ever been to one?
I haven't.
Okay, it's pretty disappointing. You expect to see like robots and, proper, like I said, Toyota's TPS system, lean manufacturing assembly lines. But what you ultimately see is that same skilled labor that's missing from the ecosystem, using a screwdriver, drilling, wearing steel toe boots, wearing
So
hard
a lot
hats.
less satisfying than you had thought you would be seeing. You still see a human building a box. It's
Yes.
just a controlled environment.
Exactly. You've eliminated rain effectively. Then to add to that, your customization level is not that high because like if it's a box, it's got to be the same box. What can you really customize from a shape perspective, from kind of certain elements, right?
And then in urban environments with the zoning resolution,
Well, the
you don't
regulatory is
even
a whole
have the
different
space
piece.
for it, right?
The regulatory is a whole different piece because as you can imagine, an inspector can't do their 5 inspections looking behind, a
Right, it's supposed to be
analyst.
completed, right? And
Yeah.
now you're doing leave out. So it's like you didn't really solve for the amount of housing we
But
need.
to me, the biggest issue is like, it's pretty practical if like, I don't know, this mic gets packaged well and you ship it thousands of miles to all your consumers, right? As like a direct to consumer company. It doesn't really work when it's a million square feet and millions of tons that you have to ship on oversized trucks.
Or
Really
any
far away.
variability, right? Or any change anywhere.
Yeah, it just
right?
it breaks. Then like the way I heard it recently, which was really on point, it's like as much as you tried to make this controllable, physically in the factory, when you bring it to the site, that's always an uncontrollable. So that 1,000-mile gap means that if you just mess something up, okay, your lag is now really big. Got to redo it. You got to like.
Agreed.
And honestly, today's labor. I mean, you hire subs and GCs all the
Sure.
time. You understand like they're not really akin to understanding new things.
Well, they're laggards, like we were saying, so they're not even
Probably the
trying to
biggest laggard.
understand,
Yeah,
right?
the
Like
biggest laggards.
they don't get it. It could be simple, but they don't understand it.
They bring their own tools to the site.
Right.
Sometimes those tools can't put together a modular box.
Correct. So we said
that's
3D
modular.
printing, that was the issue. Then we said modular, which everyone was like super excited about, has a ton of issues, and we're seeing them fail.
It could work. It could work, maybe. It could work for hotels and super repeatable product near site, but like CapEx has to come down because your investment into that gigafactory means that you have to constantly feed it with millions of square feet.
And the way we finance projects, just to mitigate risk, so everyone understand, is you pay a month, you get reimbursed a month, pay, reimburse, pay, reimburse.
Yeah,
and
those
what
guys
we're
need to be
saying,
upfront.
it's 80% fronted with slow payments after. It's like even the industry itself would need to change in the way that they want to provide capital.
Which, by the way, just zooming back to PropTech, construction tech, I think a lot of the limitations of founders in the space, like I have a simple rule. I don't advise PropTech companies if one of the founders doesn't come from the industry, because to me, it's an uphill battle.
Right.
Like you could work with the most innovative developer in the world, but if you don't understand that the limitation is LPs and debt, right? I mean, you just missed a really big
Yeah,
mark.
I had this conversation about insurance recently, and there was like this insurance tech, and I was like, yeah, insurance, but like unfortunately, the general contractor never sees the benefit. He could care less, like how you're saying we might be able to get it less. He goes, I pay the bill or I don't pay the bill. Like he doesn't care, right? Like I understand you think you're innovating, but if you're not telling him, by the way, it's gonna be $10 less, he just doesn't care.
Yeah, this is an interesting topic. You had Brad from Common on here. He has this new blog that he does.
Yeah.
It's amazing. He talks a lot about like
course.
OpCo and all this stuff and understanding.
I love it.
Separate,
What the hell is it called? It's called
Thesis Driven.
Thesis Driven,
really
and
good.
it's on Substack.
Yeah, it's very good. But anyways, the third one is...
So yeah, what was the third one? And by the way, the third one is Cuby Technologies, just so that
Exactly.
everyone knows.
Yeah.
By the way, he owns a company called Cuby Technologies.
Yeah.
This is where he's attacking.
Exactly.
Okay? So boom, what is it?
So prefab, imagine you take this room, but you take all the kit of parts for this room, you standardize them. There could be customization and deviation, but ultimately you're creating a standardized kit of parts that get made in some offsite facility and put together on site. The whole purpose is to reduce the variability and to reduce kind of the unknowns by prefabricating. Like imagine you know what goes
But not
into a building.
prefabricating a room, prefabricating
The kit of parts.
a kit of parts that's, I guess, to a
parametrically designed to fit together effectively on site.
And that a human or two humans can deal with and handle.
Well, in some cases, some people have oversized and, like you still need, big equipment. So there's levels to it. But prefab effectively is the best way to think about it is Lego blocks or a kit of parts. That's what prefab is.
So Legos in construction.
Exactly.
Right? And because of, what was that math where 5 times 4 times 3 times 2, what was the name of that math? Anyone? What's the
What do you
type?
mean?
The type of math where it's,
Algorithmic
you say,
math?
not algorithmic, where it's like that if you have 5 different colors, 4 different shapes.
Permutations. Yeah,
but because
you
you're
have
saying
hundreds
like
of
there's only a certain amount, but permutations basically say there's still thousands and hundreds of thousands of ways of putting it together.
So that's how we think about it. So like, for example, Toyota has 20 different car models, right? A Camry and like a RAV4, but then 20 other ones.
Yeah.
Each one can be designed 10 different times.
Correct.
When you multiply all that, you get hundreds of different options. So that's a way of thinking.
Correct.
About
So so people are like, oh, everything will be the same. You're like, nothing will be the same until we make 400,000 of them. And then we may repeat once.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, look, there's 3 different cabinet finishes.
Right.
If they're good, that's fine. No one cares. Look, like generally in the industry, I think this is going to be important, but like prefab is also not cheaper today. The way that people pitch prefab is, hey, you're saving on carry costs. I guess I need to define that for your listeners.
Yeah.
So the time that it takes and the longer it takes a developer to do a project, right? The more cost they're taking on.
Right, because they're paying for the money.
They're paying for taxes on the land. They're paying on
insurance, interest, yes.
The quicker you get to cash flow, the better, basically. So right now, prefab is arguing that, hey, this is beneficial for you because you're saving on carry costs. That's fine. But you're a developer. You know firsthand. You don't give,
You can curse. Sorry.
Yeah, you don't really care that much. What you care about is like day one, tell me it's cheaper. Then maybe I'll use it. And I'll adopt
it's
it.
always we have to know today, even though me and
'Cause
you,
it's part of
our
your
thesis
underwriting.
would be, we're still going to take the risk. Like we don't care. Like
Yeah.
me and you. I'm not saying everyone else
sure.
is waiting for proof.
For sure.
We are not.
Exactly.
So
anyways,
now
going back
you
to
knew
this
kit of
prefab.
parts.
Well, just more traditional prefab. Same issues as I described with modular. Gigafactory, lots of capital intensive, infrastructure. It needs to travel thousands of miles. So hard to replicate, hard to scale if you're the OpCo.
What business would you say, though, is an analogy to that? Would you call Restoration Hardware a prefab furniture maker?
Yeah, but different because they're a product and they have centralized locations. You can go and like buy
Right, so
a
it
bed,
works.
Right?
No, I'm saying because
work
that does work today.
Car companies.
Yeah, okay, a car company, right? And they can then ship the cars and that cost is in the cost of the vehicle.
So most prefab today, by the way, tries to sell you a kit of parts. And they try to plug into like, hey, like you're the GC, go put it together and figure it out, which doesn't work in the industry.
No, because again, it comes to that problem of the labor, not understanding what the hell they're supposed to be doing.
It's all botched in some capacity. But we can get into what we're doing because it's
I want to hear now. So you chose prefab.
We think it's the solution. It makes the most logical sense.
Right.
And that's what, by definition, industrialization is, right? Like that is what Boeing has done. That's what car companies have done. They've done exactly this.
Right, but you and I already discussed construction is complex, a little bit harder than trying to make it a complicated
Too many
business.
layers to the onion.
Correct.
Okay, our solution is threefold. That's kind of the big pillars. One of our big pillars looks... My partner, who's one of the most brilliant people on earth when it comes to the engineering side of our business, like literally, like he's called a 10x engineer by all the top venture firms in the world. So we tie somewhere between. There's a company called Hadrian. They figured out how to do super advanced micro tooling, basically in manufacturing, closer to on-site, and they work with a lot of like space companies, basically. So we triangulate there, hence the mobile micro factory. Our other triangulation.
So the first thing is you're creating a micro factory.
Micro factory is important. These are
That is
small
mobile.
footprint. Yes, which we'll get into in a second.
Okay.
So these are small footprint factories. The second piece of it,
Because you said before, when you get into some of the other modularity, that upfront cost is intense. But if you can do it in a micro, you're mitigating that risk. So the
our
upfront
capex
cost
to
is
launch
not
a
crazy.
factory is unparalleled.
Right.
It is
Okay,
not
so
a
that
lot
was
of money.
first. First
Yes.
was we've created a factory that's less expensive to mitigate that risk. Boom.
It's also micro because it needs to move, and that's an important piece of what we do, and that's the third pillar.
Well, what was the second pillar?
Well, this was this is the second pillar.
Okay, what was the first one though?
The
It's prefab?
No, the first one was the Hadrian microfactory. The second one was the mobile piece. So I like to use analogies. So like the third pillar is what Amazon has done. Amazon has effectively created last mile distribution for the e-commerce warehousing world, and it's massively successful.
Right.
We've done that for this prefab / lean manufacturing ecosystem for construction. We've brought these mobile microfactories closer to the site where you're actually constructing, whether it's on the site or in a parking lot across the street or a field a mile away. It's not thousands of miles.
Okay,
But
so now
effectively
explain to the contractors.
Yeah.
So what is it actually? What am I seeing? What am I feeling? What is happening?
I should have probably started with this. Basically, what Cuby is and what we're doing is we're setting the stage to commercialize hundreds of these mobile microfactories to enable developers, builders to build more effectively, more buildings with less labor. That is
Because that factory is near your site.
Yeah, so our product is not a building. It's not a kit of parts. It's not something we sell. Our product is the system, hardware and software, and it is these mobile microfactories. So this is always interesting, but like Elon Musk will be the first person to tell you that Tesla, the cars, that's not the winning solution. That's not the moat. That's not why they have the highest margins. That's not what took the longest. It's the factory and their blueprint for the factory and the ability to replicate it as they go. Granted, theirs are hard to replicate because they're billion-dollar investments, but they can nonetheless replicate it very well. We and our product is the ability to replicate this mobile microfactory with different partners. And that's our third pillar, essentially, which we're more akin to McDonald's than we are a construction company, a development company. We're not necessarily a product company. We look like McDonald's. McDonald's is a great analogy, and I think I used it with you last time, right? And the reason why it's an analogy is because I could be the shittiest cook in the world, but I could run the most P&L efficient restaurant. And that's because McDonald's has spent hundreds of thousands of hours iterating on their hardware, their software, their process, their hiring standards, just that end-to-end to allow someone like me who's never ran a restaurant to run a really efficient restaurant really well.
Fast.
And they can stamp this, and now 49,000 times later, that's what we're gearing towards. And that's what we do.
So so you have this factory.
Yeah, so
it's near a site. What's the input?
Yeah, so here's how it works. Basically, we have a lot of IP, and as of recently, no one can do this because we have a lot of IP around it, very significant IP around launching these mobile microfactories. The way they launch is it's a containerized solution. So we have about 24 containers that are custom, and within them are a bunch of machines. Think like, complicated shit like robots and stuff.
CNC,
Yes.
right?
So
things that can fabricate pieces of a building.
Exactly. So some are custom to us, some are off the shelf. We can buy some, just retool them, put our logo on them. Effectively they're off the shelf and they can be bought anywhere.
So a factory with stations, and those stations represent maybe different trades, different pieces of a product, whatever it is.
Like we've taken now in-house not only just the put it together piece, but also we make windows and glass and pipes and like all the raw elements. So it's kind of hard not visually, but to describe a factory, like if your viewers can imagine a bunch of containers lined up in a rectangle and they're interior facing, then we inflate this pressurized structure. It's not pressurized inside.
So a factory near a site.
Plop. On it, it's a non-permanent structure. These things can be put on a parking lot, they can be put on a piece of land, it doesn't matter.
And inside them are different stations.
Exactly.
Robots,
Our
CNC machines. There's machines.
Yeah, exactly. And we digital model our entire factory. So like the software, they're the same every time. So we can basically make software around them and digital twin it in Unreal Engine and basically put it into, in quotes, the Metaverse.
Which is the McDonald's, which is the hamburger comes from here, goes here, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, boom, hamburger comes out.
Exactly. But what we didn't do is reinvent the end product. We work with really traditional folks, the ones that are commenting on our stuff saying, blah, I'll never use this. This is too far-fetched. We work with folks like that. Once they step foot, once they see, they're like, oh, you do that like that? Oh, got it. Okay, wow, that's compliant. That's great. That's pretty genius, actually. So we've done something really traditional from an end product, but the delivery mechanism, the process is what we're changing. And that's what needs to happen in the industry. But effectively, these factories are fed by about 50 raw inputs. And we chose certain raw inputs to be widely available in most locales. Think like steel, glass, things that you can mostly buy from vendors. We have a solution when we want to create our own agnostic supply chain as well. So imagine like a Puerto Rico, where we're completely self-sufficient. We have containers that effectively line up around the factory. They're like printer cartridges.
And the end result, though, is it?
Yeah, so raw inputs go in. And we make things. So the things we make, I'll give examples. Like we make our own windows. We'll take and we'll, double pane a window, put framing around it, etc. We'll make structural steel elements. We'll make interior wall panels. So things like that. Then, the way to think about it is some things are custom every time. So like one house to the next. Some things are repeatable. We just cut constantly, like, certain sheetrock, certain, piping, like PEX piping, et cetera. But the end product is a finished kit of parts. Some of that kit of parts, we obviously don't make toilets. So when we finish off the conveyor, we pack, say, a toilet or, an interior finish element with kind of what we make. And those things get shipped to the site. But our process doesn't stop at the site. So there's about 29 times this gets shipped to the site, ties to the 5 inspection processes of a home. But if we go from making the foundation to the interior finish, all end to end. So our lean manufacturing process, it's off the conveyor, but then it actually happens in the same crew that's being employed in the factory plus more is the one that puts the building together effectively. The thing we solve is there's no skilled labor here. Right. That is the biggest thing we solve.
And that's because, like McDonald's,
Yep.
you're going to create a mobile-first application.
There's a ton of software that drives the non-skilled piece. So one important thing is like, I'll use like real examples. Inside the factory, there's about 35 people, all unskilled. Those 35 people have to execute hundreds of tasks. So that means that we're not dependent on a single person that has to train to do one station. Everyone does everything at once. Like the way we're thinking about it is we have these Android phones, we have an app, John Smith, he gets a ping, says go to station 29C, and it shows you in Unreal Engine what to do live. Does it? Okay, now go to station 16B. And this happens continuously, and an algorithm is pushing out these tasks. But when you're on site, we have
trackable, and know how much you're getting done, and like continually learning.
We have 70 cameras inside the factory. They're like, I don't want to get into the super complicated software stuff. But,
so it makes sense.
But we also go on site. So we're doing something really unique as well. So like, this. I mean, your subs bring their own tools. When I found that out, to me, that was crazy. My partner designed a whole tool system that we bring on the pad. Those tools are tied to how you put together the kit of parts.
Which is like IKEA, right? They're giving you the tools.
So it's funny that you say IKEA. Some background on my partner, so you understand. Like I come from this world of real estate and more of a business background. My partner is literally maybe the best hardware person I've ever seen in action. Maybe I haven't seen a lot, but he's incredible. Like he writes books in the space. He's done lean manufacturing. He's built 3 businesses in the deep tech ecosystem, all self-funded. So he knows how to run really big engineering teams. So when he sees things, he tries to improve, but not so much that it doesn't make sense and the world can't adopt it. But the tool thing made a lot of sense. You bring the tool, it's like a shelving system, and that's the part, that's what you use, and those are the tools you put things together with. But anyways, we end up putting together a building. In terms of stats, where we're cost reducing is today in the US, I'd say 70% of the cost relative to the hard costs are labor related. Which is a lot. We have expensive labor because there's a lack of it.
And
it's that simple.
Which is why we're telling our kids to get into it.
100%. It's a money-making machine. But we try to reduce that 70%. That's the big reduction. So we're trying to reduce the skilled labor by a factor of 7 to 10 times.
Okay.
We just did a couple case studies. Here's where we're shaking out. Typical single-family home takes about 5,000 labor hours to build, skilled labor hours. End-to-end, typically a crew of 12, like 12 months, et cetera. We're building a single-family home for about 1,700 unskilled labor hours right now. So where we think we're going to shake out on costs when we launch these factories, the COGS, meaning the cost to us, not necessarily what the factory sells to an end user, around $100 to $110 a foot, which, construction, that is a,
huge savings.
And this isn't stick built. These are steel, high quality homes.
So tell me, just because we've run out of time, so where are you today? When are we going to see this in action?
So to start with, deep tech takes a long time to commercialize. We're doing something massive. We're about 190,000 engineering hours into this, team of about 90 engineers. So it's a lot. That being said, we're now setting stage to commercialize. We're starting to sign our first contracts, and the way we work is we partner locally. We're never going to be a better builder developer than you, than whoever else locally is you, right? So we like to partner with folks like you. And we launch a factory together, which is its own standalone business, like a franchise, but it's not a franchise. And you use our hardware, software, and that's how we launch.
But when will we see it? Give me a timeline.
So our first one is signing ASAP. In about 12 months, there'll be one in the US, followed by 4 more.
I think that's important because to me, out of the things I hear that are really disrupting, this is one that I definitely want to watch because we saw, like you were stating, 3D printing, and we don't have this understanding. It didn't do anything. I feel like this could make a huge difference.
We think it's right. It's working. We're seeing the conversations we're having, the adoption that folks are resonating. And by the way, the cost to launch one of these is, I'll say offline to you, is not a lot. So anyone in the mid-market space launches one of these, all of a sudden has secured being, a competitor or having a competitive advantage in the real estate space for the next 50 years, because today there's no advantage. You're competing with everyone. All the information is the same now. It's becoming like what the stock market became, in early 2000s.
That's right.
There's no arbitrage. This is an arbitrage.
And an efficiency.
Yeah.
All right, Al, I appreciate you, brother. This one is fascinating, no doubt. Thank you for coming through. We got to talk about this conclusion. What did we just hear? What do we know? We found out that a lot of these things I think are kind of gimmicky. 3D printing, prefab. But one thing that definitely has the ability to change the game is kit of parts, right? He was talking about how the capital expenditure is so much. He's come up with a solution to that. What I find fascinating is we know that robotics and CNC and these machines can actually limit labor hours. Now, over the next 12 months, he's going to start to get it done. And let's see if what the theory that he's stating actually gets done. To me, this is one of the most fascinating things out there. Thank God this homeboy's in NYC, so I get to meet him. And we've got to track the way that Cuby Technologies is disrupting the space, because he's right. We need more housing. The demand is there, and yet we can't seem to get out of our way. Maybe he's come up with that solution, so we're going to find out. You better pay attention to what we're saying, because Real Tech Talk is bringing you that fire like guys like Alex at Cuby Technologies. Pay attention.